And you are live.
Here we are at House Education on Thursday, January 16th. I'm gonna take this next section of the day to meet and learn about several of the associations that are most connected to our public school system. Hear from them, hear what their priorities, concerns, and whatnot are for our upcoming legislative session, and frankly, probably 2 years of legislative ahead of us. Anyway, we're going to open with the Vermont School Boards Association. We have two representatives here who are familiar to many of us who've been involved with school boards for a long time. But anyway, would you please introduce yourselves, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for the opportunity to introduce the Vermont School Boards Association and its priorities. My name is Sue Staglowski. I am the Executive Director and General Counsel for the Vermont School Boards Association. And with me today is Flor Diaz-Smith, who is in her second year as president of the VSBA Board of Directors. So we're going to begin with Flor introducing herself and speaking about the critical work of school boards at this moment in time.
Hey, good morning. Sue just said my name is Flor Diaz-Smith. I know many of you, but some of you are new to me, so I'm just gonna go through the whole thing. So I'm an immigrant from Guatemala, a country where public education is not prioritized or seen as a foundation of democracy. As an immigrant, I cannot take public education for granted, neither do you. I know that what it is to not invest in public education and its consequences. Growing up in Guatemala, the idea that I will one day lead an organization like the VSBA or serve on a school board in a country that values education for all its children seemed an impossible dream. Yet here I am, the chairperson of Washington Central School District and the president of this incredible organization. My journey to this point was not easy, and the context of where we are right now is important. To serve in the school board, I had first to become a citizen, a challenge that I embraced because I believe my unique background, education, and experience could contribute meaningfully to my community. This journey has deepened my appreciation for the transformative power of public education, and not only as the pillar of democracy, but how it opens doors for every child, regardless from where they come from. I share this story not just to talk about me, but to remind you of the impact that public education has on individuals. I'm not saying you don't know that, it's just that reminder for all of us. So I urge you to consider your moral obligation to ensure education remains strong, equitable, and accessible for all. The future of our children and the strength and the importance of strengthening our democracy depends on it. The VSBA staff, the board, and its over 850 elected board members are deeply grateful for the work that you do every day. And we see you, every one of you. And your commitment to serving the people of Vermont is incredible. So we are at a pivotal moment in public education, which, as you know, remains the cornerstone of our democracy, or at least that's what I believe deeply. Public education is not a political enterprise, and sometimes politics plays into this thing, right? It is a democratic prerequisite. It's essential for ensuring that political and civil rights stay in place. Its impact is profound, both at the personal level and shaping the lives of students and families. Just before you were talking about construction in schools, you know, like the construction affects our student outcomes every day. So at the population level, we influence our communities and set the stage for the conditions for a better future for all our communities. At the same time, we recognize that the pressures of our taxpayers are facing are real. As taxpayers ourselves, or members of taxpayers, we share the frustration with the property tax increase and understand that the balancing that is required. However, it's not an either or situation. The challenge we face in finding out is a way to support high and equitable and sustainable education as being mindful of the fiscal realities. So I'll get to the estimate in a minute. Because I know a lot of you guys already know me, but I feel like some don't. This is a unique and critical moment at the state because the circumstances we face are complex, but they also offer so many opportunities to come together and craft an innovative solution-oriented approach. We most emphasize our interconnectedness among the building, among our students, among our communities, and future generations. As legislators, you hold the power to honor the progress of public education. And I ask you to evaluate every proposal through the lenses that will promote student achievement and opportunity for all. that it is fiscal and administrative impact that we'll have in our communities, especially with the move really fast. And does it strengthen accountability for the use of public dollars? The SBA takes this responsibility seriously and it's reflected in our priorities that Stu will cover now and have a little handout there. So thank you for inviting us to join us this morning and for your continued dedication to this important work.
And this is the handout that I'll be referring to. I'm going to start out with who we are, which is on the front. And let you know that the VSBA is a nonprofit member association that supports school boards in our work. That's who we are. All of the school boards in the state are members. So that encompasses over 850 individual school board members. VSBA is committed to a strong public education system. And we believe that public education is a fundamental right, the foundation for democracy, the core of strong communities, and a driver for economic development. The VSBA's vision, mission, and beliefs are listed on this Who We Are document, and that is also posted on your committee website. The roles and responsibilities of school board members are sometimes misunderstood. School board members, big thing to remember is they're the bridge between the community and the schools. They do not run the schools, they make sure that they are well run. Their core responsibilities are listed at the bottom here. They include hiring and evaluating the superintendent, developing a vision for the district, developing and overseeing the budget, adopting policies, and monitoring finances and progress and performance. Everything school boards do includes the opportunity for community involvement. And again, they are the bridge between the community and the schools. I will move on now to our priorities. The VSBA priorities are listed on the back side of that document under legislative platform. And they're developed through resolutions that are proposed by and voted on by the association's members. So we have quite a formal process for developing our priorities. We've divided them into 3 groups: education funding priorities, education cost driver priorities, and then our core priorities. And that's how they're ordered in the document. So I'll start with the education funding priorities. We want to emphasize that VSBA understands the education funding challenges that Vermont is facing, and that we want to be a constructive partner in addressing those challenges. We're committed to finding solutions with you. When talking about education funding, the conversation often moves quickly to numbers. And as the people who build school district budgets, we understand that numbers are very important and that they cannot be considered in isolation. When looking at possible changes to education funding, we urge you to, 1, focus on students by providing sufficient funds to support equitable, sustainable, and high-quality education in Vermont school systems. 2, ensure predictability in the school district budget process. 3, please give enough time for school districts to adjust to any changes. 4, provide data and modeling to show the impact on districts over time. 5, strengthen accountability for the use of public dollars. And 6, and this is an important one to us, include measures to address the cost drivers. And so I'll move on to some of the cost drivers that we are part of our priorities. One of the major cost drivers in the cost of education is public school employees' health benefits. We urge you to utilize the control you have by revising the statewide bargaining process for school employees' health care. We understand that this will be a difficult discussion, but putting it off will only make the problem worse. Through the current bargaining process, benefits have become so rich that school employees pay $0 in deductibles. Benefits should reflect the coverage of most Vermonters. Another major cost driver is school facilities. Many of Vermont's school buildings have reached the end of their useful life and are being kept in service with Band-Aids that are not cost effective. There's been a moratorium on state aid for school construction since 2008. And you were hearing this morning about the condition of Vermont school buildings. This has resulted in less safe and less healthy learning environments, as well as impacting school budgets with the cost of the Band-Aids. So we ask you to provide predictable and stable state school construction aid for capital expenses. A more recent and very concerning cost driver is the increased need for student mental health supports so that students can access their education. Schools have taken on this expense and the need has grown. We ask you to adequately fund mental health services and programs and ensure that the expense does not fall on property taxpayers. Another cost driver involves the legislature utilizing the education fund to fund statewide programs. This is the legislature's prerogative, but the effect can be an increase in property taxes that is beyond the control of school boards. Given the critical juncture we are at in funding education, we recommend clarifying the limitations on the use and purpose of the education fund. The last cost driver we will cover is existing laws and regulations. Many of them were put into place without attention to how much pressure they would place on local school budgets and without adequate support from the Agency of Education on implementation. We ask you to adequately fund existing laws and regulations so that school districts are supported in their implementation. Moving on to the core priorities, which are listed at the bottom here. In addition to the education funding and cost driver priorities I just discussed, our platform includes core priorities. There isn't time today to cover those core priorities in detail, but we wanted to highlight 3 of them. And those are: first, improve the capacity of the Agency of Education to meet statutory responsibilities. Second, require the Agency of Education to expand and maintain a comprehensive data dashboard. And third, restructure the State Board of Education. I will just note that these were developed by a VSBA task force made up of school board members from across Vermont. They developed these recommendations over a 10-month process in response to long-standing challenges with the education leadership structure in the state. And these challenges have impacted districts' ability to realize their educational goals. We submitted the task force report to the governor, the secretary of the Agency of Education, the State Board of Education, and all legislators in September of 2024. And if you're newly elected, you wouldn't have received that, but it is posted on your website today under my name. So if you have time to take a look at it, the details are in there. In conclusion, we want to thank you for inviting us this morning and for your dedication to the important work ahead. We do hope that you have a chance to connect with school board members in your region during this session. And we look forward to a collaborative partnership with you during the session as you work to provide high quality, sustainable, and equitable education for Vermont's students. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One question I have is, we're probably going to be hearing a significant proposal coming out of the administration. It's going to have various pieces and parts that I assume that the School Boards Association will discuss. You have a very diverse membership. You've got school boards that oversee a small school. You've got school boards that oversee a multi-school 3,000 kid district. How do you all come together or come up with your positions given that range of diversity?
The first way that we come up with our positions is through our resolutions process, which allows school boards to submit resolutions for consideration of the membership, and those are voted for in the fall. Now that provides us with a base of information about our membership's thoughts on major education issues, but to be able to respond to proposals, the VSBA board does that work. And the VSBA board is made up of, we're divided into 11 regions. We have 2 representatives from each region. We have a very diverse board with people from, from very small districts to very large districts. And in addition to those 22, Floor is the president. So we have 23 in total. So my approach is going to be, and has been in the past few months, to be regularly sending the board resources and information about what's happening. I will be sending them recordings of your meetings so that they can watch them, and referring them to specific testimony within those recordings and materials that are posted on your website, so that when it's time for them to consider specific proposals, they will have the context and they will have the background information that they need to be able to do that.
And I will add that we also have a legislative committee, because I know you guys are gonna be moving quickly. So if something came up quickly and we can't, it's not the time for a board meeting and we can't gather everybody, the legislative committee will come together and give input. And like any other board in the state, you would have diversity of thought at the board, but I think the one thing that unites us is what is best for kids. And once our board, sometimes it's not all in the same place, and this happened, you've got experience with this, it's not all in the same place, but once a decision has been made, we all stand behind that decision, right? So I don't know if that helps with the answer. I think by the time that you have a board of this large is probably, and the commitment to be at the Vermont Schools Association, they all want what is best for kids, and they're familiar with governance. And they both are pretty well versed in budget and are committed. I'm looking at what we would be sending, what Sue would be sending, weekly. It is hard to keep up with as much as we go, but we'll do our best to keep up and respond to your questions. We're hoping to ask the critical questions that would be needed, right?
We rarely get accused of moving quickly.
I know, but things are moving. Yeah, but I heard that you guys are gonna be prioritizing, right? So there not be too many things going on besides like wishful thinking.
Other questions? Yes, Kate.
What percent of premiums do teachers pay for healthcare?
The percent of premiums is based on statewide arbitrators' decision. And that it is 20% is what teachers pay.
And in recent years, 15, 20 years, have those premiums ever gone down or stayed the same?
They have increased every year.
And do you know how the healthcare premiums compare to other states?
We are working on putting together some information so we could come in and speak with you about that. Yeah, I have a 2-page document that covers that topic that I could email to you with some data that might be helpful.
Just on that topic, because I do think it will come up later and we can dive into it in more detail. But what is the current status of that statewide negotiation? When is the current agreement run out? When do negotiations restart?
Negotiations are set to restart next April.
Right, in 26.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, not in 25.
So currently you're at like a 2-year contract, that'd be right?
There was a 2-year extension, yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, just a curiosity question. How often does the larger board meet? And how are they elected to that board, or are they appointed to the larger board, the 22 other members?
The VSBA board?
Yes.
It meets most months. They don't normally meet in the month of July or October, but other than that,
We meet,
they meet monthly.
Yeah, and we meet remotely and in person. It used to be just in person, and now we meet remote in person to facilitate or, make it easier for everybody to attend, because a lot of people also sometimes have a board meeting that day, so it allows them to come for part of it and then go to the meeting. But they're elected, each region elects its members. Yeah, so we do a regional meeting in October is usually, and they elect their members.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we have the Superintendent Association. Committee, this is a good opportunity to talk about the hard work that Representative Brady does.
Yeah.
Your boss is sitting at the
Taking copious notes.
It's customary for us to share the Vermont directory with you all.
Thank you.
Has all the information from all the central offices.
As soon as you're ready, introduce yourselves and the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. My name is Amy Miner. I currently serve as the superintendent of schools for the Colchester School District. I also am currently the president for the Vermont Superintendents Association. I have been in education for a long time. I started as a substitute teacher, served as a paraeducator for a period of time, science teacher, then I was department head, then I was an assistant principal, then I was a high school principal for 10 years. And I'm in my 9th year as a superintendent at Colchester, so very invested in the education system and have done lots of different roles within that system.
Hi, everyone. I am Chelsea Myers. I'm the new executive director at the Vermont Superintendents Association. I've been with the association though for a little over 6 years. And then before that, I held roles in education research, primarily on early literacy and social and emotional learning. And also taught in the classroom for a couple of years, and then primarily have spent my career around education policy and non-profit leadership. And I started back in August. So I am the new Jeff Francis. And in Jeff Francis fashion, I was going through his office books and I found this book. It was written primarily by Bill Mathis. Some of you know Bill Mathis. And it was in 1994. And so many of the themes just are so duplicative to what we're talking about now. So I found that to be a fun little sign before we came in here to talk to you all. So who are we? The Vermont Superintendents Association represents 56 superintendents. That's all of them, and an additional 33 central office leaders or aspiring superintendents and retired superintendents. Our work falls within 3 categories of work: member services, so supporting superintendents with their work in the day-to-day operations of the school districts. So they'll call me up with a potential challenge and I help to either get them connected with the right resource or it's something that I have come across before. We do a significant amount of professional learning through conferences, academies. We train new superintendents and aspiring superintendents. We do mentoring and networking. And many of these professional learning initiatives have been focused on the implementations of laws passed by the General Assembly. For example, our 3-year inclusive education project to support districts in the implementation of Act 173. And then before my time, a multi-year project to support implementation of Act 46. So a lot of what the professional learning we're doing is helping with implementation and support of the laws that you all passed. And then the third pillar of work is advocacy. So working with you all, the state board, the Agency of Education, and other stakeholders to support the work of moving education in Vermont forward for all students. And we view superintendents as very important change agents in the process of moving education forward. We're staffed by 2 full-time employees, myself and our office manager, Christy. And Amy will talk a little bit about our governance structure.
We're very excited to have Chelsea at the helm. We're governed by a 10-person superintendent board that includes a past president. And each member of the board, we ensure that we have all regions are represented. So 5 regional trustee positions and also 5 officer positions. So that makes up the 10 components, and it's nice to have each area represented on the board. We meet monthly, and at each of our monthly meetings, we also invite the Secretary of Education to attend. And as an organization, we do 3 all-members meetings annually, and typically we collaborate with other organizations to do a fall conference and a spring conference. The next component that we wanted to share this morning is what do superintendents do? And in all of the different roles that I've had across education, I would say that the superintendent's role by far is the most complex. We do a fair amount of visionary leadership, not only within our districts, but across the state and with our other collaborators. We try to make sure that we have the highest outcomes for kids. And at the same time, that visionary leadership is directly impacted by the educational leadership that we must do. We're expected to be the experts in education and how to move outcomes for students forward. So that means we do a lot of listening, a lot of learning, a lot of working with the Agency of Education around all of the different requirements that we have and targets that we need to meet. So drafting, writing our continuous improvement plans, making sure that our student data is increasing and that we have measurable outcomes connected to that work. Probably one of the favorite parts of the job for myself personally is I see myself as the teacher of my principals, right? Classroom teachers teach students, principals teach teachers, superintendents teach principals. And so my job, central office where I work, lasts quite a bit. When will Amy be in central office this week? Because the place that is home is schools. I like to be on the ground, seeing the action, walking through classrooms, seeing what firsthand classroom instruction looks like. And then meeting with building principals, watching them do faculty meetings, watching them do leadership team meetings so that we can give them feedback. By doing that, I can strengthen my own system as I carry the overarching large ball of the work that we need to do. As superintendent, we also do a fair amount of collaboration with human health services, mental health organizations, and making sure that we are advocating for what we need to lead our school systems forward. Of course, fiscal stewardship and making sure that we are being the best stewards of every single penny that our taxpayers give us. In the months of January, February, my primary role is to educate my community around what does the budget looks like. I've actually already started that work. For me, that means in-person meetings in schools. I do in-home meetings in my community to make sure that every taxpayer in Colchester has a strong understanding of when I go to the ballot, what am I actually voting on? And that requires education the way our system currently works. Personnel management, human resources, how do we onboard employees? There are a lot of regulations connected to supervision, evaluation, hiring, and firing. So making sure that those systems are strong. Someone has to oversee all of that work. And that's what a piece of what superintendents do. Probably the most important piece of work that I do proactively on a regular basis that all superintendents do is that's crisis management. We have to have strong crisis plans and we have to train all of our employees in what those plans are so that our brains have muscle memory, so that when you're in a moment and we're responding to a crisis, you don't have to think about what to do and you don't have to go to the plan. You can just do that. So as a superintendent, you really oversee every aspect of what happens in your school district. And because of the structure of schools in Vermont, that looks slightly different depending on how many people you have in your central office to help delegate. We're not a large district, not a small district, we're kind of in the middle. But I like being out and about and seeing folks.
Some information about superintendents over the past 5 years. We pay very close attention to retention of superintendents and the longevity of the superintendency and try to do our best to support superintendents throughout their tenure. In 2019, we had 6 transitions, 2020, 11, 2021, 9, 2022, 12, 2023, 6, and 2024, we had 15, and we're expecting another year pretty similar to that. I will note, like, those are not all new superintendents that end up in roles. There's a lot of movement that happens and it kind of cascades. Like this year we had 15 transition, but 5 of those were brand new superintendents. And so we do our best to support them. We have 40 districts that have experienced at least one transition in the last 5 years. And in case you wanted a little bright spot, because there is one, the current average tenure is 6 years, which is actually almost double the national average. And so that is a pretty great statistic, I think. It has fluctuated a little bit, but currently we're at about 6 years. So a little bright spot for the retention of superintendents in Vermont, even though there's several transitions. Amy's gonna talk about a little bit about what is great about Vermont schools, and then we're gonna move into our legislative priorities.
We are in this pivotal moment in education right now, so thank you for spending some time with us today. I would be remiss if we didn't talk about some of the bright spots that are happening across the state. And so when you look at Vermont schools, we are unique in that we do have a fair amount of project-based learning. We live in a beautiful state with lots of natural resources, and our schools are using outdoor education and using the environment on their campuses to enhance learning for students. Farm to school programs, internships, community-based learning. Many of our schools provide access to health centers. Adult education happens in many of our school buildings. Family services happen in many school buildings across the state. We're really proud of the food that we served since COVID, not only during the school day to students, but there's a lot of strong information around how schools are providing meals to students and families at night and on the weekends. We have a red backpack program, and every Friday we have private donors in Colchester that help us fill an additional backpack with food that goes home every week to families. Our schools have been welcoming places not only for refugee students, but for our refugee families, and providing all of the services that families need in order to integrate with American culture and society. We have a strong commitment, I believe, in every school across the state to culturally responsive teaching and learning, financial literacy, and strong technical center offerings that our students are enjoying the access to. If you've never been to a junior chef competition, very cool, but thinking about the culinary side, robotics program. If you look at schools 8 years ago, robotics didn't happen in most of our school districts across the state. Those robotics programs are really cool. My daughter is in one of them, and the things that she knows about robotics as a 12-year-old is fascinating. So really proud of that. And then we have a lot of student-led conservation efforts and students wanting to have more of a voice in their school system. And we're seeing more schools have social justice alliances where students have more of a voice in leading the school and meeting with building level administrators to talk about how can we change the school environment to include more student voice and to make more change for students where students feel welcome and belonging. Specifically, of course, to talk about Colchester for just a little bit, our student performance data is rising, and this year in every one of our disaggregated categories, the gap closed. Every single category. Our teachers are doing tremendous work since COVID to close the achievement gap. And when we look in our data now, we are seeing lots of positive growth. A couple years after COVID, lots of our data was flat. I think there was a lot of things that we needed to do to support students and families in order to get them back on track. And I think we've done that, and the data is starting to show that.
So we'll move on to our legislative priorities for the year. You have this on your website now, and you can see who we are and the mission and vision of our association. We have several core principles for the legislative session, and then legislative priorities. So Amy's going to talk briefly about the core principles, and then I'm going to honor your time and try to go really fast through our legislative priorities.
I won't read all 7 to you, but I will hit the highlights. I think the first one is probably the most important one. It's the only one I will read. VSA recognizes the change in the educational delivery system is necessary to develop an affordable system for taxpayers while providing high quality education for students. As part of that core principle, we do believe that the Vermont Superintendents Association plays a key role as a change agent. We want to ensure that we are addressing disparities in opportunities to ensure that every student has access to strong resources. And that we need to look at legislative changes around the cost drivers. And in doing that, quality must be one of the benchmarks that we hold dear, because we want to have a strong and top quality education system for all students in Vermont. We want to also ensure in the work that we're about to do that we avoid any unintended consequences. And so that might mean that you need to go slow to go fast, that we might really need to understand the changes that are being proposed to know if we make those changes, what is going to happen, especially given the interconnectedness between ed finance, school governance, and physical size of our school buildings and proximity of home to school. The education system does not operate in a vacuum. Not only are we providing strong access to academics, There are other components that connect to the way that we provide education, and that has to do with housing, childcare, environmental, workforce, and healthcare needs. They also have a role on what happens in schools. And finally, our last core principle is some superintendents have already warned a school budget. So knowing that we are working on FY26 right now and that budgeting is underway, I am going to make statements to my community and educate them on the budget that we will warn next Tuesday night. And my community has a lot of trust in me, and communities have trust in their superintendents. We need to educate them around the ballot. So as we move through the rest of the FY26 budget, just the timeline, be cognizant of the timeline and what we have shared with our communities and how that what we have shared could change based on the decisions that you make for their taxes in the fall.
All right, so I will finish with our education or our legislative priorities. The first bucket of work is the education funding reform. And our key component is to create more equity in the education funding system by addressing the state's considerable range in weighted per pupil spending, which I believe is approximately $10,000 to $18,000 currently. Any overarching change to the funding system must be properly modeled and ensure adequate funding for high quality education. Take a look at the ed fund and determine what it is paying for. In terms of pre-K funding, revise the funding formula to incentivize public schools to run pre-K programs and consolidate oversight under one organization to simplify regulations. Under instructional delivery size and structural change, the first one on that list is class size. And the reason we put that first is because you actually have a policy mechanism already at your disposal around class size in Act 153 of 2010, which requires all districts to establish a class size policy, but the state does not set the minimum. It only sets the maximum in the education quality standards. So there is a vehicle there to be able to make change. And staff to student ratios is next because there is not necessarily a consistent method in calculating staff to student ratios. There's different ways in which people calculate, for example, contracted services, and just getting very clear about the definitions, we think is essential to be able to move policy forward related to staff to student ratios. Think about the district and school efficiency size, try to identify the optimal size of schools and districts to improve efficiency and increase equitable opportunities for students. And in relationship to that, providing extra support for reimagining what community can look like in places that may not meet those efficiency standards right now. School designation, as we're thinking about changing the delivery model of public education, we have the risk of actually expanding our delivery system more so by adding more and larger elements of choice, which don't necessarily help to bring efficiencies to the overall delivery system, both from a fiscal and delivery model. And so our recommendation is to require that districts without their own schools for certain grade levels designate up to 3 schools to serve as the allowable schools of that district. That ensures that districts without schools for certain grades still can meet the educational needs of their students in a more efficient delivery model. And then, of course, you've been talking about facility modernization this morning, so I won't go too far into that, but that's an important pillar. And then we can't talk about all of these changes without understanding what quality looks like. And so keeping a focus on what that vision for high quality education in Vermont is. If you're thinking about changing the funding structure, we must know like what it is that we're trying to pay for in order to make sure that there's sufficient funds going to schools and whatever model is ultimately selected by this body. And then to strengthen and develop the educator workforce by fostering robust partnerships with higher education institutions, creating incentives to recruit educators and supporting grow your own programs. There's many places and disciplines that have educator workforce shortages, and we know that one of the most important tools in improving education quality is the quality of the workforce, the teachers. Please consider equity when making changes to the delivery system that holds independent schools and pre-K programs that receive public tuition to the same standards of quality, equity, efficiency, and transparency as public schools. Back to the mental health and social services. Provide clarity on funding responsibilities between education and human services based for school-based mental health services, and invest in mental health support for youth and their families. And then we hear a lot of reports about Medicaid being extremely cumbersome, and so taking a closer look at that and potential expansion to students without IEPs. That's something that's happened nationally for I think a decade now, but is not something that Vermont does. I admittedly don't know a whole lot of the why of that, but was curious as to why Vermont has not done that expansion when other states have. Again, school construction and facilities aid is critical, but two more nuanced points in that category is the use equitable standards for capital reserve accounts. That was in Act 183 of 2024 to allow facilities investments to remain outside for pupil spending calculations. It's currently deterring people from doing essential work to their facilities because of the inclusion in the excess spending penalty. And then a big one that we've been working on for a number of years is the PCB testing program. I hope that you'll offer us an opportunity to come in and share about what schools are going through. It's pretty significant, those that have been identified as having above the actionable level in the disruption to students. And as far as we know, the reimbursement process for those schools has slowed, if not stopped. And so thinking about putting a pause or complete halt on that PCB testing program in order for schools that have been identified to get the proper support they need to remediate. Like the Vermont School Boards Association, we think it's important to examine the statewide oversight structures of education in Vermont, including the relationship between the state board and the Secretary of Education to ensure proper checks and balances, such that one branch of government does not have total authority over all of the appointments. And then just being really considerate about new legislation and so making sure that those are fully funded and fully vetted for maximum efficiency and leverage to improve education quality and experience for students. There's going to be a lot of change coming, so just asking for all of us to ask ourselves whether it is the most essential change at the moment when we're thinking about policy considerations. Tried to go through that fast. Sorry for.
I appreciate that. One thing, I guess I think that the Superintendent Association has been pretty valuable resource to us is its ability to sort of put a concept out there to its members and get pretty quick feedback for us. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways we can do that. We can do more targeted feedback requests if it's like, for example, is going to impact small schools. We can reach out directly to those superintendents. We also get very good response rates from like surveys very quickly. Superintendents are very responsive. We can pull together meetings very fast on things. So it's one of the benefits for having a smaller membership because we get a lot of really focused attention from the members when considering new policy proposals.
And could you just explain briefly your funding? What funds for BSA?
Yeah, we both raise money from our professional learning opportunities that reach more than just superintendents, so a lot of different parts of the delivery system. And then we also, superintendents pay dues into the association.
And just to clarify that, generally those dues are actually paid as part of a school budget. They're not paying it personally.
Correct. Yep. I think that's pretty common throughout the association structures.
Any questions, folks? It's Kate.
Just a quick one. For point of clarification, do superintendents get the same healthcare package as teachers, or is that negotiated separately with the school board?
It's typically negotiated with the school board. I know for myself, and a number of other superintendents, we have the same.
to be clear, it's separate from the negotiation process, so the statewide negotiation process. So it could mirror what educators get, but it's done separately.
Thank you.
Representative Brady?
You can keep this short because I think we're gonna hopefully take time as a committee to get into it in much more detail, but under instructional delivery, instructional change and class sizes, and amending EQS. Can you talk a little bit about how EQS is working or not working right now in the field? Like, what are the sort of checks on whether we're meeting EQS, and what has that changed over time? Like, is the agency involved in overseeing assurances around EQS, or is it fairly regulated is not maybe the right word, but.
I'm going to invite you to have a brief response, because we'll definitely dig into this later.
Each superintendent in previous years was emailed a list of assurances that you needed to sign off on. Was it something that you were meeting, not doing, or working towards? Those were your three choices in the assurance component connected to the EQS.
There's been varying levels of, for example, involvement in the continuous improvement plans, in the integrated field reviews, so that's ebbed and flowed over the years, but it's a pretty big topic, for sure.
Thank you both very much. And just a reminder, of course, knowing that you are all spread out everywhere, when we do have superintendents in testimony, you're welcome to Zoom. You know, you have busy schedules and all that.
Yeah.
Thank you for making the drive.
Yeah, thanks, Rob.
Okay, we are now at, running late, but I think we'll be fine to meet our lunchtime. Vermont Principals Association, you're ready.
Good morning, everybody. For the record, Jay Nichols, Executive Director of Vermont Principals Association. I've got cards for you that have my information, including my cell phone, if you need to ask us a question or text us, not about baseball.
No problem.
So I'll start by just telling you a little bit about the VPA. The VPA was founded in 1915, and it was originally the Vermont Headmasters Association. And it was founded originally, and up to the 1990s, was almost all about overseeing high school athletics. That was the genesis. Around the 1990s, a lot of research came out about principals as instructional leaders. And that's continued to today. Prior to that, principals were basically managers of buildings, boilers, buses, and behavior. They weren't expected to be in classrooms. They weren't expected to be helping teachers in their instructional practices. And that has all changed since the 1990s. So principals are much more involved in instruction. In fact, the latest Wallace Foundation report, research report has had principals identified as equal with teachers in terms of the impact on student performance. And the reason for that is, quite honestly, is we have less teachers with experience. And so principals bringing teachers together, having instructional coaches, helping teachers improve their craft, supporting the nuances of the building, making sure the building's running well, all helps impact the positive learning of students. So that's been a recent research trend. A few things about the VPA. We have a 15-member governing board. It's spread around the state. One retired principal, one career center director, one assistant principal, and then the other 12 are active current principals in the state of Vermont. And again, it's geographical, school size. We try to have a balance of gender. Right now, we have one more female than male. So we try to keep as even as we can on all of those things. We have 28 sports committees that we oversee. We oversee lots of professional learning. We have a new principals class. We've had over 270 principals go through that class. That class is taught by me. It has been for the last almost 15 years now. In fact, Amy might have been up here, and I think all of her principals except for one went through that class. So we try to really provide first class instruction for them, for principals. We also run a mentoring program. By Vermont law, we're one of the few states that does this. Every single principal gets a mentor for their first 2 years. And it can be through the VPA, but it also can be separate from the VPA. And superintendents get to choose. They consult with us. We give them a list of mentors that are trained, and then they go out with the person they think is the best fit for the principal. And that's been a very successful program. We have 6 employees. for the entire state. In terms of principal turnover, it's annually around 20%. Now, that number sounds higher than it is, because many times it's a principal who is being tapped to go from a small school to a bigger school, maybe in that same district, or is becoming a superintendent. Most superintendents were principals prior to being superintendent. So it's not uncommon for people to go from one job to another, or go to a bigger school, or to move closer to their home. And we do lose principals every year across the border to New York and Mass, because the pay is higher there, and the retirement systems are so much stronger there. So we also have that as a factor. Let's see, what else? I wanted to mention, first of all, in terms of, and we'll just go through our list here, equitable funding changes. I've had a couple of legislators send me emails saying, you were on TV the other night saying you were a little concerned about the foundation formula. And I know not everybody took it that way, but when I made comments about the foundation formula, when I was being interviewed by, Cutler. Thank you. When I was being interviewed by him, we were talking about the foundation formula in general, and I was giving him a reserve about that is what's happened in Alaska, where Alaska went like 9 or 10 years in a row without putting in the cost of living index that's in the law. So for 9 or 10 years in a row, they level funded. So what happened in Alaska was the base education amount didn't change. The places that had plenty of oil money, they locally taxed and added programs. The places that didn't have that level funded, which really meant cuts to the program. So a foundation formula can work if it's done right. Just want to put that out there at the very beginning. So in terms of our priorities, I just want to say we've got 2 goals for the EPA, and these are not in your notes. First is to uphold the public mission of schools, to provide equitable learning opportunities for all Vermont students. And I can send you a copy of these. The second is support, retain, and recruit school leaders with a focus on increasing diversity and fostering resilience. Now, in our membership, we are predominantly at the elementary level, female principals. We have about 60%, 61% are female principals. At the high school level, it's closer to 50-50. Overall, we're slightly more skewed in the number of females than we are males. But if you think about that from a logic model, it should be that way, maybe even more so, because our teachers are around 75 to 78% female in the state of Vermont. So when we think about that, we should have more females leadership, and that's something that we've tried to lean into. We do a Women in Leadership Conference that we sponsor with the superintendents, and we're constantly trying to recruit strong female teachers and instructional coaches to consider the pathway to the principalship. And now I'll just jump right into my major notes, take any questions. First, in terms of equitable funding changes, we would like to see nuanced approach that looks at all the different legs of the funding formula. So for us, a really big thing is looking at cost drivers that local districts don't have a lot of control over. I was listening to Senator Baruth and Speaker Kowinski talking on the radio, and they both talked about health insurance. Health insurance is one good example. For your edification, principals get the exact same health insurance as teachers, and it's done at the state level. Principals are actually represented by Vermont NEA. So one thing that we're represented by Vermont NEA, and principals do not have any member on that commission, but we are treated the same as teachers and paraprofessional support staff at the unionized contract, all the same. And it's 80-20 for us. And VPA employees are treated the exact same way. Whatever our principals get, we get. So we pay 20% of our insurance, and the VPA pays 80%. So very similar to teachers. For us, one of the big factors here is that we want to make sure that same dollars, same rules for any changes to education funding. You're going to hear me say that over and over again. If we send money to private entities, we need to make sure that it's transparent, that they're accountable, and they're following the same rules for their students in terms of admission, in terms of quality of instruction they're getting, the support that they're getting, so that it's equitable and it's fair. Your job is not to be the Senate of Education for public schools or for private schools. It's to be health education for all students in the state of Vermont. So your job is to represent all students. And as at the VPA, that's what we attempt to do every single day. We did want to mention specifically, like right now, we have money coming from the Ed Fund that we think should be coming from the general fund or other sources. And one example is early childhood money for private providers. We have private providers, and we have had now for over 10 years, receiving money that do not have licensed teachers providing instructing kids. And in schools, we're required to have licensed teachers even for preschool kids. That's not equitable, and it's also not fair to the kids. We can bring in lots of research, some of you have seen the research, and we can bring in principals to testify the difference between the kids that are in programs that are overseen by schools directly versus childcare centers where there's not a licensed teacher. The difference is enormous, and principals can tell you the difference and how impactful it is to have a licensed teacher working with kids. Same thing with private schools. VPA strongly believes that the rules should be the same if money is coming from the education fund. If a school is truly private, the money's not coming from the education fund, then that's different. Chelsea mentioned a little bit about the education governance construct. We've been a big supporter of moving from an agency back to a Department of Education. Full disclosure, when the superintendents voted on this, whatever year that was, we were pretty much split into thirds. I was the treasurer at the time. There was a group of us, Jeannie Collins, myself, Elaine Pickney, that really felt we should keep it a commissioner and keep it a department, not an agency. We were worried about there being too much politics in education. There was a group of us that were really adamant that the governor needed to be more involved, and that the governor's office, and it wasn't Governor Scott at the time, was able to easily wash their hands of education issues, and therefore it should become an agency. That was led by a person who became the secretary eventually, Dan French. So, we could not decide. So the VPA, I mean, the VSA at the time did not weigh in on that. I think after what we've seen over the last 10, 11 years, we should really look at trying to move education away from the political constructs of having it be an agency. And along with that, get a 2-year governor term, guys. Now, we typically don't vote out incumbents, but we did vote out the lieutenant governor this year, first time in 200 years, and it could happen with the governor. Have the direction of our education system be at such a whim that an agency could change on a dime like that with a change of governor concerns me, and I think that should be something that's thought about. We give some examples of what we think that could look like in here, in terms of restructured agency of education and state board. You can read the rest of that. Pre-kindergarten, we support full ADM for full school day, full school year programs for school districts that want to do that. We think that's an easy change you can make. There was legislation that tried to do that last year. So places that are already doing that, for example, St. Albans City is a great example of that very poor community. Their local voters in St. Albans are funding full day pre-K. That should be fully part of the state system, and they should get full ADM for that. They're doing the right thing for lots of kids in poverty there, and their taxpayers are paying extra for it because they don't have extra taxing authority for that. That's an easy fix. We should definitely have pre-K for schools that are doing full day programs be funded, same as we do kindergarten. I'm not gonna touch on vaping. We support it every year. The governor's vetoed it when it's passed. I hope that the House and Senate again will support vaping law if the bill comes forward. Principals can talk to you all the time about kids that are getting addicted to nicotine. It's a crisis. And we have buildings that we're putting in detectors to tell about vaping. We got assistant principals are putting chairs outside the office and out of the bathrooms and working from the chairs because it's such a crisis. And what's happening is these tobacco companies are targeting our kids with these fruity mint flavors and bubblicious nicotine, and kids are using these products and they're getting hooked. Maybe it's not as bad as cigarettes, I don't know, but it sure is not good for them. So I'd like to see the legislature act on that again if the opportunity is there. PCBs, I think you all know how we feel about that. No funding, no testing. The president of the VPA is Rebecca Phil. She's the principal of Twin Valley Elementary School. Their schools had major issues because of PCBs, and they will be working with the EPA as long as that building's in existence. The president-elect, incoming president for next year is Chris Young. He's the principal of North Country Union High School. And they get to hear all those 150 fans going all day, and their kids were intense for the fall. Either one of those would be happy to come in and talk to you about the actual impact of students on a day-to-day basis because of PCB mitigation efforts that have taken place. Reading Implementation Act 139, we are saying, please do not make any changes to that. Please don't even let people talk about it. Let the law go in for a couple years. We're already hearing talk about changing it to say it applies all the way through 12th grade and all these things. Let the law settle. Let schools actually do the work for a few years and then see where we are in terms of reading test scores. Adult basic education, I think the AOE will be talking to you about that. We need a clear path for those kids who used to be able to get an adult diploma through the schools. That's changed. And so far, we haven't seen a plan from the AOE on how that's going to be addressed. And I have principals sending me email saying, what are we going to do in June? So I'm hoping this gets fixed before that. And then the last one is cell phones. We have worked with some state officials, as has, I think, the Vermont NEA has been part of it, and DSBA and BSA, about common sense bill that would focus on policy. We don't want you to spend a lot of time on it, but it would restrict some use of cell phones or most use of cell phones from 8 to 3. We don't want to do is open up the can of worms that we did last year, where people were talking about not letting kids use Google Docs and all that silly stuff. We're trying to make kids digital learners in today's world. And other than that, that's all I have. I want to go quick because it's also important to leave Vermont NEA plenty of time. But I'll take any questions that you have.
Do you think a cell phone bill, like a bell-to-bell policy, is creating an unfunded mandate? Is it going to create costs, either financial or time in schools?
It's gonna create time. There's no question about that. And it's gonna have to be enforced by somebody. It's gonna probably be 90% my members enforcing it through teachers, and principals taken away. That said, vast majority of principals do think that something should be in place, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a law. Although one of the advantages of the law is it gives cover. That's one of the advantages of it. And, the bill that we've been talking about is nuanced, where there would be exemptions. We have a lot of kids that use them for dialysis checks and stuff now, things that you wouldn't, when I was a principal, it didn't exist. So there's gonna have to be 504 accommodations and those types of things for some kids. There's also times where it's educationally appropriate. I get a strong letter from a teacher who teaches, just plumbing, heating, electricity type stuff. And he said his kids use it for their electricity work all the time. And they're actually using it to look at what wires they're cutting, all this stuff. And actually they use the flashlight on it. They're also downloading data from a live circuit. Well, stuff like that, I think we need to leave some flexibility in there for the principal to be able to say, yes, you can use your phones in, Mrs. Brady's tech things.
Certainly a topic we'll be learning a lot more about. Appreciate it. Thank you very much, Jay.
You're very welcome, anytime.
All right, folks, next up will be people from the the Vermont National Education Association.
Morning.
Go right ahead, introduce yourself and take it away.
We'll do it. Let's sit up here just a bit. So for the record, Jeff Van, Executive Director of Vermont NEA. Thank you for having me here today and be around much of the session. So if you have any other questions, please stop me. Whatever. I'll start with just some slight introductions as to what Vermont NEA is and how we're structured a little bit. We're about 13,000 members who work in every public school and several of the historic academies around the state. We're paraeducators, bus drivers, school workers, or school cafeteria workers, administrative assistants, as well as teachers. And so we cover the gamut of all the working custodians. Probably missing somebody, but we cover the gamut of everybody who works in the school system in Vermont. So those 13,000 members are represented by a board of about 22 members from around the state. It's consists of paraeducators, bus drivers, teachers from around the state, and they make decisions on behalf of the organization. And I work for them, the board of trustees, the board of directors at Vermont NEA. You will also see, in addition to myself, you'll see Don Tinney, who's the president of Vermont NEA, a 31-year English teacher in Middlebury, and then ended up at BFA St. Albans. He's not here today, but you may see him in and around the building. You'll see Colin Robinson, our Director of Government Relations. He's your probably go-to resource for immediate questions. He's here a lot more than I am. And he's affable and probably friendlier than I am. So you'll get a better answer out of Colin. In addition, you'll see Rebecca McBroom, our General Counsel. She was here earlier, but had to run to a meeting. Becca is knowledgeable about labor issues, of course. A lot of special ed work she's done. So she brings a little bit different platform to the conversation, but a different idea, different perspective as General Counsel. So she's also a source for you from NEA. So that's how we structure ourselves. In addition, I'll just give you a little flavor about how we were structured as a staff. We have 7 UniServe directors who work around the state. The UniServe directors almost entirely are teachers. who we've hired, and our model is we work with our members to help bargain local contracts, process grievances, and we work with local leaders in that regard, whether sports staff or teachers, to do a lot of, we think it's much better to work more closely with your local administrator or school board to figure out problems, nip them in the bud earlier. And that's kind of the model, the approach we have. Consequently, we hire administrative directors, UDs, as we call them, who are all usually right out of the ranks of teaching, and work with other members, and we train them, and that's how we work. We also have a director of professional programs, Juliette Longchamp, 30-year teacher in Vermont. Dr. Longchamp, as we know her, is our director of professional programs and does more PD than any other person in the state, and works with educators around the state in all forms. And indeed, we have the largest, I think, licensing mechanism in the state. Several years ago, President Conlon, you asked me what we were doing to address the teacher shortage. We're actually licensing teachers, not Vermont NEA is not licensing them, but we're working with them to get through the peer review process to become licensed teachers. Last year, I think we were over 80 in that regard. So we are doing the work necessary to get people licensed and in a classroom and teaching kids. And so that's happening. We work with local schools on that. We started off mostly in the Northeast Kingdom in that, with the curriculum directors up there. So that was a program that was seeded with money from the federal government under ARP. Through the AOE, we signed a contract with the AOE to do that work, and that work is ongoing now and funded through schools directly to make sure that people get the licensing background that they need. So that's work that's ongoing and robust, I would say. And then heard some discussion about healthcare. We have a director of member benefits, Mark Hage, who works with his counterparts at VHI, which is the Vermont Occupational Health Initiative, which is the trust, the jointly administered trust that has the health insurance products offered to educators. So that's who we are, what we do. And if you have any questions, by all means, holler and ask me. Briefly, our legislative agenda, you have on your website, maybe you have in the background, I don't know. But we understand and acknowledge that there's some education funding issues that need to be addressed. We want to be at the table. We're at the table. We're open-minded. We have a proposal that we put out just before the holidays. And I'll just, in brief, you have that as well. We think the income thresholds, income sensitivity, the cliffs as they're known, haven't been adjusted for inflation in a very long time and need to be. So we think that's one quick, effective issue that can be addressed and would affect positively about 50,000 Vermonters to reduce their property taxes. That's a pretty significant move, that just catching up the cliffs to catch up to inflation. Also, we heard somebody, I don't know if it was Chelsea or Jay, say, looking at what's coming out of the Ed Fund, making sure that we know what it is we're paying for out of the Ed Fund that used to be paid out of the general fund. So last year, we heard the administration say that the increase in mental health services that are being paid for by schools was in the tune of $50 to $60 million. So that was last year, the increase. That's gone up and continues to go up because the mental health system in the state is really not doing what it needs to be doing at all. And it's been left to the schools to pick up that piece of the puzzle for kids. And they are doing it because they have to. There's no choice in the matter. So that's been a cost shift from the general fund to the Ed Fund, so property taxpayers. I don't know if it's intentional, but it has happened. We heard that through the pandemic, and it's only gotten worse. So we think taking a look at what's coming out of the Ed Fund is important. And lastly, we think moving to the income tax and abolishing the residential property tax is a good move. 2/3 of taxpayers pay their education tax based on their income through income sensitivity. And we think that should be extended to all Vermonters, and therefore you could abolish the residential property tax. And that would be significant. So the sheet there, it does give some examples on page 2, but it's certainly, there are ways to lower property taxes in the immediate future, look at what's coming out of the ed fund, and then move to the income tax, sort of a progressive, three-step move that we're suggesting. So we think school finances is obviously a big issue. It is, we know that, and we want to remain involved in those discussions. So thank you for keeping us in mind as you move along. Just a few, it's 9 pages of our agenda, as you might guess, with 13,000 members. We have a lot of things that mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And acknowledging that students are in crisis now more than ever before, whether that's because they're not getting services elsewhere, but they are ending up at schools, and we need teachers, educators, some of you here in this table know that better than I do. Kids are in need of a lot of help and support, like never before. So we think that increasing school counselors is actually a good move to work with kids. It may be paid for differently, but certainly getting kids what they need is what we think is advisable. Looking at community schools, expanding that to address more and greater services that are coming to the school, kids who are coming with greater needs. Obviously, funding the AOE is an important part of this piece too, because you're going to have an agency or department, as Jay suggested. We didn't think it was advisable many years ago to go to the agency, but I'll leave that on the table. But you need to fund the AOE so that it can do its job and advise and counsel schools. So we think that's important. Looking at administrative efficiencies is a good move as well. So, and also lastly, to address teacher shortage, there was in 2023, the legislature established through VSAC a student loan forgiveness program. We think that should be extended. It worked, and it was desirous from people looking at that. So we think keep that going. Quick
question, when does it expire?
Yeah. I don't know. Go ahead, Colin.
My understanding from DSAC is all the money's been expended, and it's response, they doubled the applicants that they have.
We were actually able to keep it going because it hadn't been fully subscribed, as I recollect. Now, you're saying now it is fully subscribed. Okay.
Yeah. So there is no deadline to it at all. So, one oddity in the education system is school support staff who are not employed in schools over the summer are ineligible to even apply for unemployment insurance. Unlike any other seasonal worker in Vermont, school support staff can't apply for unemployment insurance. We think that should be changed. They were able to do that in the 80s and early 90s, I think it was. Some federal laws changed. Vermont changed with those federal laws to allow it. Federal laws changed back. Vermont did not change back. And so we are, we believe that should change again back to the way it was in the 80s, and school support staff should be eligible to apply for. May not be required to give it to them. There may be various reasons why they wouldn't, but they can't even apply for it now. And we think that's a mistake and should be fixed.
Any sense of what that would cost?
No, I don't. For the most part, a lot of these people are offered summer positions. Again, they could apply, but if they're offered a position or they have to get another position, most of them do work other positions in the summer, so they wouldn't get it. They would be ineligible to receive it, but they would be eligible to apply for it. So the answer is, I don't know. It may not be as much as people think, because most people do get second jobs and sometimes third jobs. I know I have a board member who's a paraeducator. She has 3 jobs. So these are hardworking folks, hardworking Vermonters who want to work, but sometimes can't get a job for various reasons. And so they should not be ineligible to even apply for unemployment insurance. So that's, think of the mistake that's already adjusted. As it relates to healthcare, we are very interested in working with our colleagues at Blue Prospect to move to lower the cost of healthcare. Reference-based pricing is something that's been done in 7 other states, which with much success. I understand that there's a concern that it may shift. We actually think it would be good to apply reference-based pricing to all Vermonters. It is not lost on me that just yesterday, the CEO of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont said that we're paying too much in hospital costs. Prior to that, the Green Mountain Care Board said we're paying too much, as did the Oliver Wyman report in September. So we are spending a lot. We have the highest premiums in the country, healthcare insurance premiums in the country. Why is that? And it's mostly because of the cost of hospital care. We need to look at that. And one way to look at that and address that is through reference-based pricing, which is simply capping, giving hospitals a reference by which they can't charge over. And so in other states, Oregon and Montana, for example, they pegged it at Medicare plus I think it was 200%. So they're making twice what they're being paid, reimbursed twice what they're being reimbursed for Medicare. Right now, VHI is being charged more than 300% of what Medicare pays, so 3 times what Medicare. And so if you were to gradually lower that or bring that down in some methodical way, we would be paying a lot less. And that's what the Green Mountain Care Board said in December, I think it was. So a lot of conversations will take place about that, we hope. I think it's a meaningful step in the right direction to lower the cost of healthcare for everybody. So that's one solution. We do think that the state should continue to fund the free universal lunch program. I've heard more and more from my board members about how important this is, about it removes the stigma from kids from having to apply for free and reduced lunch. It is a really significant program for students, and we think it ought to be funded. And how you fund it out of where, that's a discussion, obviously, but doing away with it, as some have said, we think is categorically wrong and ill-advised. School construction, I was on the task force 2 years ago. It's an ongoing conversation. Obviously this morning, thank you for that presentation. I like hearing that. And we want to remain in that, but certainly restarting some significant school construction program is necessary. It is, our schools are woefully behind the curve on the facility management's just outdated everything, facilities all over the state. So the $6 to $9 billion price tag that we've seen bandied about is not, we don't sneeze at that. We don't cavalierly say this, but it's got to be a long-term solution. And Chris Roop talked about it, there are many ways to fund it, but getting going, we think is important. And so certainly fully funding the testing and remediation for PCBs. These are learning environments for students and the working conditions of educators, and they ought to be working in places that are safe, simply put. So thank you for that. Skip through a couple of these, you may be familiar with them. We do think that there ought to be a wealth tax to apply to those making more than $500,000. Would raise, I think, a little over $75 million. And you could use that in creative ways, but we think that there is interest in that from my members, and I think across the state, people think that somebody making more than $500,000 can afford a little bit more to help the state and pay their fair share. Additionally, keeping the pension promises from a couple of years ago, that's on the right trajectory. We heard from the treasurer last week. Things are moving in the right direction. Keep steady on that. I call it oatmeal. We want to hear oatmeal about our pensions. We don't want to have spicy things in our oatmeal. The pension needs to be funded. It was not funded for, as the actuaries suggested, for many, many years. That's put us behind the curve. We've started to address that. That's going in the right direction. Thank you. Keep anything we can do to keep that going is great, in our humble opinion. The state needs to some way respond to the radical U.S. Supreme Court decision in the Carson v. Nagin case, so that we remain true to our constitutional separation of church and state, which right now we don't, not adhering to our own constitution. So I think that we need to, as a state, get together and figure out how best to respond to that decision, so that it's thoughtful and remains consistent with our constitutional values and principles. So happy to work with you on that as well. Acknowledge that we want schools to do better. They do a great job. Our public schools do an awesome job right now. They're meeting the needs of students across the state. And educators are really working with a lot of kids with a lot of different needs and doing great stuff. One of the things we know that is important, Jay just talked about, school leadership is very important to schools. And why is it that more people aren't going into principalships? Because great teachers turn into great principals. I think should be an examination of that. We want to make sure that we have great principals in all of our schools. They're the ones who are school leaders that our members work, that my members work with, and that's important. So look at that. And certainly looking at the AOE capacity. What have we asked them to do? Can they do it? Can they do it with fidelity? And I'm not sure the answer is yes in all cases. We may have over asked them to do things and not given them the resources with which to do them. So that's an examination. I know when I started out here many, many years ago, there were robust special ed teams, for example, that would go around the state and meet with schools and work with them and try to better and improve their practices around special education. That's not the same. That's not happening now, and that's a loss. So I think that there are ways to make sure that the AOE has the capacity we think it should have, that the state thinks it should have, I should say, that you as legislature think it should have. But it's a matter of capacity for them right now. So with that, I'll leave it to any questions you may have, and happy to answer questions here or later if you have them.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Just to, this is really for the committee's information. So we've had a lot of discussion about healthcare. Jeff Van brought up records-based pricing. I can assure you that that is a topic that is being taken up at the healthcare committee this year. And I'm going to ask Annie to send you all a link to a YouTube video. Last year, we had testimony from Mark Hage and from Behi, just sort of talking about why our health insurance rates are going up so much. It's actually very clear, I think, valuable piece of testimony to watch. And so we'll just, I'm going to send that around to folks and we can find it in the archive.
If I mean, I don't recall the archive, but I think it was Bobby Joe Sauls and Mark Hage. They're co-administrators of Behi, and so they work well together, and I'm sure it's a cogent, thoughtful presentation.
Yeah. Yes. Representative Two.
Yeah, thank you. I just have a quick question on page 2. I'm just kind of curious.
Sure.
State should, as a matter of law, make a default for those who borrow to purchase or refinance a home to escrow their property taxes as part of their monthly payment. I was just kind of curious on that.
Yeah, many states have that. So in other words, you get a mortgage. The default is you escrow your property taxes. And we think it ensures that somebody's paying their mortgage and their taxes on a consistent, ongoing basis. Frankly, I don't understand why banks don't do it. We don't do it here in Vermont. And we think it's probably a better way to ensure that property taxes are paid instead of getting once or twice a year a big bill facing you in your family finances. So it's just baking into your mortgage as a default. You can opt out, no question about it, but most states, it's an opt-in feature of their mortgaging. And we don't do that here. We just think it should be reversed.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Just again, for the committee, a couple just topics that were brought up will be things that we'll be looking more into. The loan forgiveness program, I think by all measures has been a success, and we'll have VSAC come in and talk about their administration of it. It was funded with ARPA dollars one time, and I guess it's fully subscribed.
The ARPA dollars were helpful significantly and got a lot of things going. And then the question is, how do we maintain them or not? And as long as we do that intentionally, I think with our eyes wide open that we do or don't want to continue things, it's important to look at.
And we'll also spend some time talking about community schools and the model, the sort of pilot program that we funded, again, with one-time ARPA dollars a few years ago. Anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's right. Good to see you.
All right, so we are back here at 1:30.
Are we here or are we in a pavilion?
What's that? I'm sorry, we're at the pavilion. Yeah, will be a big crowd. period.
Room 260.
260.